So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're discussing Onshape properties and managing Onshape properties within our documents. Now, as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. We really do take a lot of useful information from the questions that you ask, and I always do my best to address any questions that you put up there. So make sure to ask any questions that you'd like in the questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll do my best to stop and address them as we're going through today's webinar. Now, one thing I want to point out before we get into any of the topics of the day, anything specific to Onshape properties, is this in particular is an area that we're constantly working on, and we're working very hard on right now in particular. So realize that a lot of what I'm going to show you here today will be improved very soon. In fact, I've got word from our development team that this is something that's very actively being worked on. So just realize that soon, very soon, hopefully, we will see Onshape property improvements and things like that can really make a big, big difference. But what I'm going to focus on today is primarily what you can do right now. And so we're going to focus on, the ability to create properties, the ability to add properties for parts, assemblies, drawings, the document, the part studio, how that interacts with the drawing, how that interacts with other apps like bills of materials, for example. I'm going to walk you through just a short discussion on all of these things. And this is going to be a short webinar. So again, feel free to ask any questions as we're going through things. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are always a few questions that I like to ask of the audience. And one of the first is, how many out there are using Onshape or interested in Onshape for professional use? And if you would just take a moment to answer the poll, if you're using Onshape today for professional use or you're interested in using Onshape for professional use, please let me know. It just allows me to gauge the audience better when we talk about, future topics. So I'm going to give you just a second. We'll close that one out. And it looks like just about 70% of the audience is looking for Onshape as a professional use, and that's interesting. So let's get back into it. Now, what I want to discuss today, as I mentioned, is discussing properties, oftentimes referred to as metadata, essentially, details of your project, part, assembly, drawing, whatever it may be, that you want to associate with that thing. Again, often referred to as metadata or properties or custom properties. There's a long list of names associated with, the way to attach these bits of info to a particular thing. And what I want to discuss here today is managing properties and where we do that inside of Onshape, where the various places are that we can do that. And of course, show you a simple example of it. Now, again, feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this. I want to start off really basic. If you're not familiar with the concept, the idea is, custom properties are metadata, just bits of information associated with a part, an assembly, a drawing, or an imported file. In a traditional CAD space, if we're talking about the traditional SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA, these are bits of information associated with files, part files, assembly files, and so on. Now, of course, Onshape doesn't have files, so it is a bit different in that sense, but you can still associate information with a part, assembly, a drawing, or an imported file in a similar way that you would with files. Now, the thing that is going to be changing, the thing that's going to be working a bit different in the near future is right now we have description, part number, revision, and state, and these are the available properties that you have to work with. You cannot, as of today, and this is an important thing to note, add more properties to this list, and that's something that we're working on. So what I'm going to show you today is description, part number, revision, and state. And all of these are available as properties as today that you can find and associate with any part, assembly, drawing, or as I mentioned, even imported things that you may be working with. So that's a quick explanation of custom properties. A good example I always give is part number. Oftentimes I have a pump, let's call it pump A. And, as I'm building this, oftentimes my company has an internal part number. I have a way of describing it. I'm not referring to it as 615 FSD. I'm referring to it as pump housing. But, my company uses a part number scheme to, number their parts for the bill of materials or for the PLM software that I may be pushing this data to. So Oftentimes, again, think of it as little bits of information you may need to associate with a part. Description, part number, revision is another one. Maybe I'm revision C, revision D. That's a bit of information that I want to associate with it. So that's a simple explanation of what a custom property is. Again, you may hear it referred to as just properties, metadata. There's a lot of names for describing it. What I want to get into next is what they're used for. And the big thing I think a lot of users ask is, can I take the properties and input them into the drawing, into the title block? And you can. The drawing properties will map to the title block, assuming that it's set up correctly, assuming that you have it mapped correctly. And I'll show you an example of this in just a second. But other apps also use it. Bill of materials. If you've ever used OpenBomb or one of the other bill of material apps, it will also pull in all of this metadata. In fact, what's really neat about OpenBomb is you can edit the bill of materials. If you haven't used OpenBomb, it's a bill of materials app in the App Store. And it's actually a tab in the document that's your bill of materials. And you can edit it almost like a spreadsheet. And the neat thing about this is you can type in values and push properties back into the Onshape parts, assemblies, or whatever it may be. So just keep in mind, bill of materials apps use these properties. Drawings can use these properties. And I think for a lot of users out there, ERP or PLM systems where you're trying to push the data from the CAD system into some kind of resource planning software, lifecycle management software, where all of that little bits of information really make a big difference. So these are where those things start. When you create a set of properties, often the goal is to push it into one of these. And these are just three of the most common, but your goal is really to take that information and push it into something, a drawing, a bill of material, or some other software that allows you to manage systems. So the most common use cases I can think of, and again, I think most users fall into one of these kinds of categories for what they're trying to accomplish. Now, how would you accomplish this? And again, this is another area that we're going to be improving over the near future here, but there are a lot of things that you can do right now. For instance, I can edit the properties of a workspace and edit all parts, assemblies, drawings, imported files, all in one shot. I can edit all the properties. So that's one of the easiest ways. You'll find that under the document menu, and I'll show you that in just a second. But you can also right-click individual parts. You can right-click individual tabs, a part studio or an assembly or a drawing. And you can also edit version properties. I'm going to show you an example of this in just a second, but when you're creating your document and you go in to edit the properties, that's the active document. But you may want properties specific to a version. Revision A, for example, has certain properties. And you can do that. You'll see an option when creating a version to also edit the properties. So these are the key things. Again, you'll find them under the document menu. You'll find them in the right-click menu, probably the most common, just right-clicking. But you'll also find them when creating a version. So let's jump into a simple example of this. And as I mentioned before, it's very, very basic. If I wanted to edit a property or properties associated with a part studio or assembly, I can find all of them under the document menu. So in the top left corner, you have the document menu. And if you jump down a bit, you'll see Workspace Properties. Okay. Now, this will give you everything in the document. So you have, all parts, assemblies, part studios, drawings, even imported files. As I mentioned before, you can associate a property with an imported file if you choose. So just realize, you can sit down and start to insert the description, the part number, the revision, all in a single place. Now, it's real simple to do. So for instance, if I want to enter a description, this is the mountain bike frame assembly, let's say. All right, mountain bike frame assembly. I make sure to hit the check, right? And that will accept the description. And now you've entered that description in for the assembly. Now, part number, same thing. If you left click where it says empty, you can then start to type in a part number. Same thing goes for revision. You can say revision A, hit the check to accept, and now I've entered a description, part number, and revision. Now, one question often comes up is, well, how come I can't change in progress. And this is a very important thing in Onshape. You can only change the state when creating a version. And this is very important to the workflow process where we're trying to establish who has permission to what at what times. As a CAD admin, let's say, and I have, I'm working with maybe 8 engineers, I'm the administrator of the Onshape account. I can go in as the administrator of my team, create a version, let's say revision A, change the state to released, then change the permission so that it's view only. And I've essentially released the design. And then you could mimic an ECO type workflow by doing something very similar. So the idea behind state is it allows you to establish the state of the document and tie that with other things, later on. So just keep in mind, you can only change the state while editing or while creating a version. Okay, so, and I'll show you that in just a second. So again, first things first, this is where you create or edit your properties, right? And you can do it all from a single page from the document menu, as I mentioned before, in the top left, Workspace Properties. That will give you everything in the document. And by the way, oftentimes I get asked from the user, how do I create a description of the document that I can see from the documents page? And that you can do right here. This is the document level description. And that will show when you click on the thumbnail and you see it in the documents page. So you adding some useful text here can be helpful. Now, this is everything at once, but I did mention that you can, kind of selectively go in and define what it is that you want to add properties to. So for instance, I could right-click a tab. Let's say that I don't want to see everything. I could right-click a tab, go to Properties, and you can see now I'm editing the properties of just this one part studio, not the entire document. Question, forgive me, which property editing features are available in the mobile app? I don't see a method for accessing the document menu in the Android app. Forgive me, I don't have an Android in front of me right now. I do know, at least off the top of my head, that on the iOS app you can view the properties. I believe it's the same for the Android, and just from memory, so forgive me, I believe there's a menu in the top right that allows you to select, like an ellipsis menu, where you'll see an option for properties. Forgive me, I'm not looking at it right now, so don't quote me on that, but I believe that's where it would be. If you stick around towards the end, I will boot up an Android device and figure that out for you. Okay, so this is me editing the properties of a single part studio. Again, not looking at everything at once, looking at just the properties for this individual part studio. Now, this part studio has 5 parts within it, and that adds another layer to this. How do I associate properties of the individual parts within a part studio? And the answer is you can right-click a part in the parts list, and you'll see an option for properties. And that will, of course, give you the properties for this specific part, and not the part studio, not the assembly, not the document. So again, a more granular level. So just keep in mind, you can right-click a part, you can right-click any tab, or you can go to the document menu. It just depends how specific do you want to get. Do you want to associate a property with an individual part, the part studio, or the document? Now, I mentioned part studio assembly and document, but I haven't mentioned drawings, and really the same thing applies to your drawings. So if I jump into a document here with a drawing, you'll see I've got a simple part and a simple drawing. And if I right-click the drawing tab, just like right-clicking the part studio I did a moment ago, you're going to see that option for properties. So I click properties, and I get, again, the same list of options: description, part number, revision, and state. And the neat thing about this is, and in the case of Onshape provided templates, and you can even do this to your own custom templates, if you fill out this information, it will auto-populate these details into the title block. So if I select, and I add seal retainer, for example, as a property, you'll see it populate that in the title block. All right, so we can add a part number, and let's say revision B, right? And then all of that is being added to the title block automatically. Now, again, you can do this with the Onshape provided templates. You can do this with your own templates if you choose to. But the key thing about that end is it's linked to the drawing properties, not the part properties. And that's a question I see already. And it's a good question. It's something that we're currently working on. When you do this, when you update the title block in this way, it's linked to the drawing properties. So again, right-click the drawing tab, properties. It's not linked to the part studio as of this moment. That's something that we're aware of, we're working on. But if you want it linked, you can link it to the drawing properties. Just right-click the tab. Can the part number be the same as the part name? Yeah, you can type it again. There's no way to link it as part name. You would have to type it a second time. But yeah, it would just be a manual process. All right, so moving on. Again, just trying to drive home the idea. If you update the drawing properties in the same way that you update the part or assembly properties, in the case of using Onshape provided templates or ones that you've customized, you can actually get the title block to update automatically. And if you make any changes, of course, it will update as well. So just keep in mind, drawing properties work the same way part and assembly properties. Just right-click the tab, and you'll see the option for properties. Now, I mentioned before versions and the ability to create versions and edit the properties at the same time. And this is an important thing for a lot of users, because oftentimes, I'm going to market with, product A, and I'm at revision A, and I want to be able to distribute that to the necessary vendors that I have, or maybe it's, my machinists or whomever it may be. I want to send them not the latest design, but that revision A, revision B, whatever is, currently going out to the shop floor. And the neat thing I wanted to point out is when you're creating a version, so if I click create version in a document, for example, you'll have this, let's say that this is revision A of my document, right? And, we'll call the name Rev A. So I'm creating a version in the document. In this dialog, you have this option, create version and edit properties. And what this does is it allows you to edit the properties associated with it, with the entire document, and it captures all of that as part of the version, right? And that's useful because if I send someone a link to revision A, they're seeing all of the various part number description revision states that I want them to, and not the latest, right? So again, you can edit the properties in the same way that we could, a moment ago. So this isn't any different. You just left click the empty, you start typing some text in, and it will allow you to input values. What is unique about this is notice that you can now set a state. So I can set this to released as the state, right? As soon as I hit done, then I would go in, change the permissions to the team maybe, and say that it's view only. And because it's revision A, it's going out to market. We're not currently editing this design. So it all ties in with that workflow of being able to set the state, the revision, and then restrict permissions. All right, so again, state, just keep in mind you can only change this while creating a version like we're doing here. You can't change the state just of an active document. And the idea is tying the two together. So that is state, that is creating and editing versions specific to creating and editing properties specific to a version. And I think that's what a lot of users are requesting, because now if I send someone a link to revision A, they see exactly that and not the latest. So that is creating and editing properties, specific to a version. The last thing that I wanted to get into is OpenBomb, and it's a great example of does a lot of things that you may want to do in more complex scenarios, where I may want to insert custom properties into, my bill of materials, or I may want to insert more items in my bill of materials that I didn't model. That's a commonly asked question. What if I add this and this to my bill of materials, but I don't want to build a CAD model of it? All those things can be done with an app like OpenBomb. So if you haven't checked it out, in the Onshape App Store, there's a big App Store button in the top right. Under Data Management is an app called OpenBomb. It's a free app that allows you to generate a bill of materials automatically off of your Onshape assemblies. And the neat thing is it's very much editable. So I can go in, edit part number properties, for instance, right? And push these changes. So let's say that I wanted to make the changes, update the Onshape properties. I can do that. There's a big button, Update Onshape Properties. And that will allow me to push in the changes made from part number back into my part studio or assembly or whatever it is I may be editing. I can also add items, right? So I can add items to it and then insert and type in new things, right? So just keep in mind, if you need the ability to, pull a list of your parts studios or assemblies from Onshape and then customize that list for your own purposes, for your own bill of materials purposes, OpenBomb, and there are a few other BOM apps, but OpenBomb is probably the most robust. It allows you to do some really neat stuff. You can edit the bill of materials. You can, insert columns. You can even construct history and save revisions of the bill of materials independent of the model itself. It really is a full-blown bill of materials app. And a lot of users ask, well, how would I communicate with some other application? And oftentimes, if you're working with something downstream, like a PLM software, for example, a lot of applications communicate via CSV files and passing CSV files back and forth. It's one of the more common examples I've seen of communication between CAD and PLM. And with applications like this, you can export this as a CSV file. You could attach the CSV file to the document if you wanted to, or send that downstream to a PLM software, one of those types of applications. There's also options for PDF and Excel, but just realize that you have the ability to export all this data as a relatively neutral format in CSV. All right, so I see a few questions. Can I get the drawn date updated to the date the drawing is finalized automatically? Can the check and approve fields on drawings be populated from the properties? No to both of those as of today. But I will say that this is an area we're working very hard on. And not just, updating the properties, but understanding the state of the document and, that relative to permissions and populating properties automatically. So again, you can't automatically do these things today using linked values and having them update, but that is something that we're definitely working on. Question: OpenBomb maps Onshape part number to the name field instead of part number field. Will this be addressed, or is this a permanent feature? I actually think that may be intentional. I believe it's to allow you to alter the name and group them by name. I believe because there's an option for group by name in OpenBomb. So I believe that's intentional. I'm not 100%, but I would say 75% sure that that's an intentional change, just so that you could group by name. And using BOM for Google, what determines the order that the parts come in? That's a good question. I think it's the same order that they're assembled in, but I could be wrong. I'm not 100% certain on how it pulls that information. I believe that's if you're referring to the Onshape for Google Sheets, Onshape bill of materials for Google Sheets. I'm not sure of the order. What order it pulls it in. Another question, a very good one. Can you create custom properties? And the answer is no, not today. Not in Onshape itself. Now, in OpenBomb, you can. I can add a property in OpenBomb and then start to give it a name, like cost, and give it a detail. But in Onshape itself, you can't add properties to the parts or assemblies or drawings just yet. Again, something we're working hard on currently. Can you sort by a certain column? You can sort, yes. If you left-click the top, you will get that sort behavior. All right, so that really is what I had planned for you. I just wanted to, again, point out, I know short webinar, but the ways that you input data, again, into a document, any kind of meta properties, from a top level, you can do it from the document menu. and this will grab everything in the document and allow you to put properties in for those values. Or you can get more specific. I can right-click a tab and say properties, or I can right-click a part, say properties. Right? Same goes for drawings. I can right-click a drawing, say properties. But again, the idea is, it just depends, at what level do you want to apply the property? At the overall document level, do you want to see them all at once, or do you want to get more specific? So that is what I had planned. Question, does the where used give the assemblies where each part is used? That's the idea. Yeah, it will tell you where that part is used. That's what where used will give you. All right, so let's wrap things up here. I do have one final question for the audience. So if you would bear with me, is anyone out there interested in a private demonstration or discussion from one of our account managers on how Onshape can apply to you specifically? We can have someone meet with you and discuss, in detail how Onshape might fit for what you're doing. And we'll have one of our account managers reach out and you can ask any questions that you'd like. So if you're interested in a private one-on-one discussion, let us know. But that's really what I had planned. I am going to stick around and answer any questions. I see there are a few left that I haven't got to, so forgive me. I will stick around. I'll make sure to get to all of them. But I want to say thank you, everyone, and have a good day.